Welcome back to our Bible study of the book of Daniel. I am Father Ed and I am leading us as best as I can. This is for St Andrew's Southgate, but if you're joining us from anywhere else, you are most welcome. The best thing is to get a Bible in front of you, although I will put the text up on the screen as much as I can, but I won't be reading it as we go along. The other thing to say is that this is the fifth session of a series of sessions, so we're covering chapters 10 to 12. If you want the rest, then you'll have to go back in time, and if session 1 gives you the sort of the background to the book. Okay, so we're going to go straight into chapter 10, verse 1. Now, we begin in this section a complete vision. Essentially, this is all one big vision, this whole section. And this is a vision of Daniel, who is being helped to interpret his vision by holy angels. First of all, we note that Daniel is, we're reminded of his Babylonian name, Belteshazzar. And we're given here some background for him sort of preparing to receive a vision. So there is mourning that takes place, sort of repentance and mourning presumably over Jerusalem. And that the timing here would suggest that the mourning has lasted right through the festival of Passover. So instead of feasting, he was fasting. But this signals that this vision will be like the Passover, about the deliverance of Israel from its oppressors. Normally when there's reference to the great river, that would mean the river Euphrates. But here it is the river Tigris, which is a deliberate allusion to the Seleucid Empire and the capital of Seleucia, built in 312 BC on the river Tigris. So we're being transported to that scene, to the time of the Seleucids, even though we are supposedly in the third year of King Cyrus of Persia. So we move on to verses 5 to 9. The man who appears is almost certainly an angel, and this would correlate with the prophet Ezekiel, which says, well, various things. Ezekiel 1:1, as I was among the exiles by the river Chebar. So there's a similarity there of location of when an angel was seen. 9:2, a man clothed in linen. 1:16, their appearance was like the gleaming of beryl. And 1:13, something like torches moving to and fro among the living creatures. So that correlates really well with what we have here in Daniel. An angelic figure, probably Gabriel, here to help interpret the vision. So the mention of the sound of his words, this signifies that this is likely to be a vision of calling. The volume of the voice signifies, of course, the importance of that voice, and also, of course, helps to account for Daniel's fear. Once again, only Daniel sees the vision. It is intended for him. But this also sort of amplifies how significant this vision is given to him, only for his eyes. However, the others are all affected as well. Certainly it has a huge physical impact on Daniel, and we might think of similar accounts like the conversion of St. Paul. Verses 10 to 14. So God and the angel, they have responded to Daniel's call, and he is greatly beloved. These are first and foremost words of comfort. It comes up a couple of times that he is deeply beloved. So there's a lot of fearful things happening, but God is very much with him and for him, and he is a child of God. The princes mentioned are, as I've said in past sessions, they are angels associated with the different nations. Michael, of course, being the guardian angel of Israel. And they are at war themselves, these guardian angels, mirroring the wars on earth. The fact that Michael had to go to the aid of Gabriel explains that wait of 21 days before Daniel could have an answer to the vision he required. So I think it's a rather fantastic sort of an account of the inner workings of heaven, that these sort of things go on, that one angel comes to another angel's aid, and then one goes off to do a certain deed, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. But the message is mainly to reveal what will happen to Israel at the end of days. That's our focus. Verses 15 through to 21. So again, there is reference to words, to speaking, and then later to lips. So this is all characteristic of a vision of calling. Only then does Daniel speak once his lips have been touched by Gabriel. My Lord refers to Gabriel, my Lord's servant to Daniel. It's a little bit confusing, that sentence, but it's quite simple really. He is asking how such a one as an angel could be talking to him, Daniel, a human. It's extraordinary. A bit back to sort of Psalm 8 again, as I said in the last session. Who are we mere mortals? Yeah. Again, the vision is a burden, but Daniel is reminded that he is greatly loved. The moving from the threat of Persia to Greece talks of the movement into the conquests of Alexander the Great. The closer we get to the 2nd century BC, the fuller the exposition and the description of history becomes. It is as if the writer knows that period far better than he does the older period of the Babylonians, which is a bit hazy to say the least, particularly on who were the rulers and in what order. And then we have this reference to the Book of Truth. And this book particularly is about what God is going to do at the time of the end. It is the true account of what will happen. So we're already into chapter 11, verse 1 to 9. So here we begin with this, now I will announce, or something similar you'll have in verse 2 in your Bible. And that is like the formal beginning to a speech. This is the main event now. We are moving into the actual vision, which is going to run essentially until the end of the book now. So first of all, we hear about Xerxes, who, at the height of the Persian Empire, has conquered vast swathes of this part of the world, and invades Greece, and and has that. There's a little bit of a struggle with the Spartans of legend, but then we have Alexander the Great, who fights all the way back and completely defeats the Persian Empire, and then becomes the next great empire. Then, of course, Alexander dies young and splits the empire between his 4 generals, and the 2 generals and the 2 areas that concern us are of Ptolemy and Seleucus. So then Ptolemy although there's this sort of failed alliance between Ptolemy and the Seleucids, including the murder of an heir who shall not endure, we are told. Then we come to Ptolemy II, who avenged the murder of his sister. He campaigned against the army of Seleucus II. He captured Seleucia, the fortress of the north, we're told here. But Seleucus fights back. And on we go, verses 10 to 13. Then we have the rise of Antiochus III, known as the Great. and he's the one that pushes back into the land of the Ptolemies, and the fortress that's captured this time is probably Gaza, possibly Raphia or Pelusium. Going at quite a pace, so the wonderful thing about video is you can pause it and have a deeper look at the text, but there we are. So we're going into verses 14 to 19. The lawlessness refers to insurrection in Egypt during the reign of the infant king Ptolemy V, a real time of weakness for the kingdom. There is lawlessness amongst their own people, but there is also, we are told, lawlessness amongst your own people, our own people. This is Daniel's people, so this seems to refer to the Judeans who aligned themselves with the Seleucids. The great invasion includes the beautiful land, that is Judah. The woman in question here is Antiochus III's daughter, Cleopatra. Not the famous Cleopatra, that's a bit later. But the intention was to plant someone in the Ptolemies' court where they could influence the king. So she's married off to the king. Didn't work because instead she encourages her husband to strengthen his alliance with Rome. So then Antiochus III turns his attention now to the coastlands, eventually landing in Greece before being defeated by the Romans at the Battle of Thermopylae in 191 BC, and then the Battle of Magnesia in 190 BC. Defeated, he returned home and then died in 187 BC, killed by the inhabitants of the east, where he had plundered the temple of Bel, that god where Daniel gets his Babylonian name from. On to verses 20 to 28. Then succeeded by Seleucus IV, who sent Heliodorus to exact duty from Jerusalem, but was then killed as a result of a conspiracy led by Heliodorus, and so Seleucus IV died neither openly or in battle, as we're told here. But now we come to the real interest of the chapter, Antiochus Epiphanes. The kingdom is not rightfully his, we are told. He takes the crown by intrigue. The Prince of the Covenant is almost certainly the high priest Onias III, who is removed from office and then murdered in 171 BC. Whenever he makes an alliance, we are told, he double crosses them. He takes from the richest, but he also furnished the city. But of course this is at the expense of the people. The people who received the benefits of the booty were most likely the influential Judeans, who were happy to be Hellenized and to go along with things, align themselves with Greek culture. Those who opposed it were the victims. So then we hear of further invasion, more intrigue, and then talks in Memphis, which clearly went the way of Antiochus Epiphanes. But the result is that because warfare is expensive, he raids the temple and therefore turns his heart against the Holy Covenant. Verses 29 to 35. Now comes the time of Rome, referred to here as Kittim, the ships of Kittim, and Antiochus Epiphanes is pushed back. He turns his anger on the Jews and pays heed to those who are willing to collaborate with him. The temple is profaned, preventing the worship of the Jews there, and then he installs something on the altar in 167 BC, almost certainly the statue of Zeus. Again we hear of Antiochus Epiphanes seducing those who are willing to collaborate. We hear of the faithful persecuted, possibly referring to the Hasidic Jews, the forebears of the Pharisees, that is, and then we're told a little help comes in the form, no doubt, of the Maccabees and the Maccabean revolt, which I talk about in a different session. But already we have a first glimmer of the prospect of hope in the end. Verse 36 to 39. So here we have a whole list of charges against Antiochus Epiphanes. He does what he pleases. He is autonomous, a law unto himself. He considers himself greater than any god. He speaks horrendous things against God. He attempts to dissuade people from following the faith and laws of Judaism. No doubt this is the kind of the testament that is being brought before God, who is sitting in judgment in heaven. We are told even his own gods, that's the Greek gods, including Tammuz, who is synonymous with Adonis or Apollo, the dying and rising god of Egypt and the Middle East, the one beloved by women. I mean, essentially none of these gods are anything compared with what he thinks of himself. He can't really worship any god because he's too busy worshipping himself. And then we have this lovely bit about the god of the fortress. That's who he really worships. And that could be a reference to Zeus. But I think more likely Antiochus Epiphanes was well known for erecting fortresses all over the place, particularly in Jerusalem. In fact, he kind of turned the temple itself into a fortress compound. Particularly unpleasant for the Jews because these fortresses were, of course, manned by foreigners, something that the residents particularly hated. Maybe that's the reference, by the help of foreign gods. So, yes, he kind of worships the fortress, loves the god of the fortress is what he's all about. Finally, we once again hear of the way he divides the community by rewarding and schmoozing those who can be bought. Verses 40 to 45. So his conquering and reign of terror continues. Notice the allusions to winds and floods, water and air, which we see elsewhere. We've seen in the previous chapters, in the form of creatures who come up out of the seas and winds from heaven. He doesn't come to an end on the way to the coast, actually, as it predicts, but in Persia in 164, but his end does indeed come. I think that's the most important point. It may signify that the writer, doesn't know what happens to him in the end. That it is written before the death of Antiochus Epiphanes, but nonetheless, he does predict that he comes to an end, and he certainly does. Perhaps it's worth noting, as I read in one commentary, that people in difficult situations, they tend not to demand perfect clarity from their seers. What matters is that the future addresses the needs of the reader, i.e. to know that God rules. Virtue is rewarded, and a new day will dawn. Chapter 12, verse 1 to 4. So now we move from the temporal to the eternal, from the earthly to the heavenly. Michael is the protector angel of Israel, but he's not the deliverer. The deliverer is God. God's people are those presumably written in the book, the faithful. Now, finally, is the great revelation of Daniel. There will be a resurrection for many, perhaps meaning all who have died. Certainly it emphasizes the numbers who will be saved. Now this is a concept that really appears here first in this form, although the doctrine is developed more fully, of course, later in the Bible and very much in the New Testament. In the earlier books of the Old Testament, punishment was corporate and it was worldly. Jeremiah and Ezekiel then lead us into a theological idea of personal retribution. Then we get to Job, into a theology that says God does not always punish sinners and reward righteous people in this lifetime, but God is just is just likely to do so after death. Job 14 13 to 14 considers this possibility that Job will be vindicated in the grave. Now Daniel's vision confirms that this will be the case, with many of the dead raised to eternal life and others to everlasting contempt. Many, we are told, shall be running back and forth. That's a reference to those who will move between the traditional faith and the Greek culture and religion. I suppose in this context are seen as less sort of faithful. What is sort of predetermined here is not every detail of human life, but what God would do and when. So humans are free within certain limits to make their own choices, but God will do what God intends to do in the end. There's no such thing as absolute freedom for humanity. There are limits to human behaviour of which God will tolerate. Verses 5 to 12. So 2 other angels appear. They're not named. Possibly they are there, or well, probably there, to sort of bear witness to the oath sworn by Gabriel. The angel swears by God that this figure is true. The figure of the time of the end, when it's going to all come to an end, is true. And once again we get the 3.5 years. An evil but limited time. That's what that means. Daniel seeks more information, as I'm sure we can empathise with, but is told that is enough for now. And then you have this wonderful last line of the book, which assures Daniel that he himself will be part of the resurrection and the end. And the word rest here, it means more than just relaxing. It is the kind of rest that a king takes, having defeated all his enemies. The struggle is behind him. God has defeated his enemies. It's interesting that word rest, which I don't even know how to pronounce in Hebrew, NWH, nur. In other places in the Bible it refers to death itself, that rest. So I'm going to talk a lot more about what I think it all sort of means in the last session. So I hope you'll join me for that. But what I love here is that we can't be left totally satisfied. In those last couple of sentences, we're again given 2 numbers, slightly different again, almost as if to say, you're not going to be able to work this out. And the second number, that little bit longer, as again, sort of saying, those who just endure that little bit longer, they will be blessed for that. And I love the serenity of this end. Go your way, Daniel. Close the book. Put the book down. Enough words. All will be well. And remember that you are beloved. And I think that is where we also have to, as it were, end the book of Daniel, to be satisfied enough that we cannot know everything. But these words that have been revealed are no longer frightening to us. Daniel is no longer a book that we kind of think, I don't know where to start with that. It's so kind of weird and strange. Actually, there's a great deal we can work out from it and take away. But in the end, God's plans are partly a mystery to us, and that is faith. And we have to sit with that and just simply know that we are loved. Okay. Please join me for the last session, which hopefully I will broadcast fairly soon. God bless. Bye for now.